But I thought, really, in its incredible faith is the title of our series. So I thought this morning, that's exactly what God has called us to be, is incredible. He has an incredible challenge for us. He has some incredible opportunities for us. I mean, when you realistically look at the kind of lifestyle that Jesus has called us to live, there's only one word it's incredible. I mean, think of some of the things that God has asked for us. Think of the things that He's called us to do, how He's called us to be, the people that we're supposed to be in Jesus Christ. And it is incredible. This thing's not working up there, by the way. That's incredible too. There you go. Matthew 5:30 says, if your right hand calls you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than the whole body to go into sin. I mean, you think about that. He says that's incredible. Then he tells us, he says in Matthew 5:29, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. Now he's not literally talking about poking your eye out, but he is telling us that there shouldn't be anything any more important to us than doing the will of God, and that we shouldn't let any sin keep us from doing the will of God. Then he tells us in Matthew 5:39, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek to him also. Now that's hard. I mean, we don't want to do that. How about this one? Matthew 5:40. If someone sues you for your shirt, give him your coat also. Lord, he's already got my shirt. What's he going to do with my coat? Again, Lord, if you start letting people take advantage of you, that's what they're going to do. I don't know about this. I mean, what He's called us for is incredible. He's called us to an extraordinary lifestyle. But maybe this one really hits home to you. He says, if someone compels you to go a mile, go with him too. I've already done what they've asked me to do. And now you're telling me to go too? You're telling me to go beyond what is normal? Then he says this one, really good. Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you. And pray for them that despitefully use you and persecute you. Lord, he was nasty to me. I mean, he said ugly things to me. Not only to me, he despitefully used me. What do? You do good to him. Lord, what if I just don't knock his block off? No, you love him. You do good to him. You do these things. But God, don't you know, he did it on purpose. Do good to him. But Lord, he used me. Find something that you could do for him. I mean, don't you just sometimes really hate those scriptures? I mean, those are tough scriptures. But that's why God called ordinary people like us, ordinary, everyday people like us, to do incredible things in the kingdom. To be incredible. Because if you're going to be a Christian, that's who you are. You are incredible. There's power. To know the power that God gives to those who are followers of him. It's incredible. It's extraordinary. And he's called us to live an incredible lifestyle. Not only does he call us to an incredible kind of lifestyle, but he also calls us to an incredible mission. I mean, he tells us in Matthew 28:18-20, go therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the earth. Each week I pass thousands of people in Crossville, Tennessee, who do not know Jesus. And when I think about this challenge that he's given us to go into my world, but not just my world, the world. I mean, when I look at the world, Africa, Asia, South America, Europe, I am amazed and overwhelmed at the incredible task that God has given us as members of the body of Christ. Our God calls ordinary people like you and me to do extraordinary tasks. But, I shouldn't really be surprised, because if you read the Bible, and that's what we're going to be doing all week, is when you look at the people who are serving God all through the Bible, you can find out that that's the general story that runs through the Bible. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Today I want to land on Exodus chapter 3 and 4 for just a moment. A man that we all know, a man named Moses. In Exodus 3, 1 through 6, he says, "Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law." And he goes on, "The priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses said that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush doesn't burn up. When the Lord saw that he had come over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the Lord God your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at the Lord. Now here's Moses. And God gives him this thing. Moses had been educated as a prince of Egypt. Moses had been there, the most powerful nation of all time at that time. The most advanced teachings of that day. He was trained to be a prince of that country. But he didn't use his education. He was on the backside of Mount Horeb for 40 years. Not ruling a land, not doing great things. He was just in the middle of nowhere, going nowhere. In fact, he's a perfect example of a consummate underachiever. I mean, he hadn't done anything with his life except shown he had a temper. He murdered a guy, showed that he was afraid of God even to look at him. He probably wasn't even a very good shepherd if you think about it. I mean, he had been tending sheep for 40 years and he didn't even own his own flock. He was tending his father-in-law's flock. So he wasn't even that good a shepherd. So, Moses is not much of a character except to say that he's just an ordinary guy, just like most of us. And God comes to him and he says in verse 7 and 8, the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of the people of Israel. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians, to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. So Moses hears this, and Moses, now here he is. I can just see the wheels clicking in Moses' mind as God tells him this. Boy, I sure am glad God's going to do this. If God knows Pharaoh as well as I do, he's got his work cut out for him. But not only is he going to do that, he said he was going to drive out the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites and all these different people. Boy, I'm glad he's going to do that. Then Moses gets a little concerned in the next verse. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way of the Egyptians are pressing them. So now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of the land. Now, wait a minute. Me? God, I thought you said you were going to do this. I thought you have heard the cries of the people. I thought you were going to go in there and get them. I'm just an ordinary fella. This is an incredible task. Why pick on me? Get somebody else to do it. Then look at verse 11. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Israel? Moses says, I am nobody. God doesn't care about Moses' background, his job description, his talents, his weaknesses. God doesn't really care about it. What matters most is found in the next verse. And God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses says, I'm nobody. But then God tells him, I am sending you. And so he calls him to an extraordinary, an incredible job. How does he do that? How are you and I to do incredible things? The first thing is what he said in that verse there. I need to understand that God is with me. That's what he told him. I am with you. But Moses is just like you and I. God said, go, and lo, I am with you in all the world. I'm about to trip over these shoes. God says, go into all the world with the gospel. And yet we look at it and we say, wait a minute. This is too big for me. We need to understand that when God gave the Great Commission, what else did he say? Lo, I am with you always. I'm with you. Yes, it's an incredible thing that I've asked you to do. But just like he told Moses, he tells you and I, we think, what an incredible task. He must be talking about somebody else. He must be talking about the preacher, those trained professionals. He must be talking about the elders or the deacons or somebody else. God gave us a commission, and we have the same response that Moses has. Oh, but who am I? I'm just an ordinary guy doing an ordinary job, living an ordinary life. And God says, I have an incredible job for you. You need to do this. And Moses, it didn't matter that you are an ordinary person with ordinary abilities, because that isn't how you get the job done to begin with. What does matter is that I am with you. An extraordinary God with ordinary people can do extraordinary kinds of things. That's how God gets things done. He uses what he has by working with ordinary people like us. He tells us in 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 9, for we are fellow laborers. What does that mean? Well, it means we are working with God. We are co-workers with God. We are working with God. We work with him. What an incredible God gets with ordinary people like you and I. Incredible things begin to happen. We need to understand that. That's why this challenge of Matthew chapter 28 is such an incredible task. But it's not an impossible task. Because Jesus says, again, lo, I am with you. Always. And so we see that. We see what he tells us in chapter 3, 21 and 22. I will make the Egyptians favorable, disposed towards this people, so that when you leave, you will not be empty-handed. And then he says, every woman is to ask her neighbor, and any woman living in the house of the articles of silver and of gold and of clothing, which you will put on for your sons and daughters, and you will plunder the Egyptians. God says, not only do I want you to go in, but when you go in, I want to tell you just how good it's going to be. You're going to go in, I'm going to give you all kinds of stuff. I want you to go in. Here, can you imagine an ordinary Hebrew slave, housewife, walking up to a perfumed Egyptian woman saying, hey, I like that necklace. Why don't you give me that necklace? And she gives it to you. Man, I love the silverware that you have. That's going to go good in my home in the promised land. And they give it to you. Man, I love the perfume you're wearing. What is that? I'll take that too. Man, you got gold. We're going to need that. That's what he said. God says, not only have I called you to an extraordinary thing, but I'm going to provide everything you need when you go. You're just going to go up to these. And can you imagine, again, a Hebrew slave doing that to an Egyptian woman? But he says, that's what's going to happen. That's exactly what happened, because an incredible God works with ordinary people to get incredible things done. And so he goes on. Verse 2 through 9. Then the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. He asked this question of him. Then he goes on. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. No wonder. Then he goes on. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into the staff in his hands. "This," said the Lord, "is so that they will believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." Then the Lord said, "Put your hand inside your cloak." And he put his hand inside. Moses put his hand in his cloak. And when he took it out, it was leprous like snow. "Now, put it back into your cloak," he said. Moses put his hand back into his cloak. And when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, "If they do not believe you or pay attention to the first miracles, they will believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground." Isn't that interesting? And Moses, basically God is saying, so what's your excuse? He takes a staff, throw it on the ground, it turns into a snake. Grab the snake, it turns back into a staff. He said, "Put your hand in your cloak." It turns into leprosy. Puts it back in, brings it back out. It's back again like it ought to. He tells him, "Dip some water, pour it out." It turns into blood. "What do you need? What's your excuse?" He says, "But God, I'm just not eloquent." Moses said to the Lord, "Oh Lord, I have never been eloquent. Neither in the past nor since have I spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and in tongue." Now here's the second way ordinary people can do incredible things with an incredible God. The second thing he says is, when you take the ordinary things that you have in your hands and you use them for God's glory. He tried to make excuses. Moses, aren't we all like that? "Well, I just don't have enough time." "Well, God, I just don't have any money." "Well, God, I can't get involved in that because, my family problems or this thing or that thing." We always make excuses. Somebody comes and asks you to do something. "I can't teach a Bible class. I'm too nervous. I can't do this thing or that thing. I'm not a very good speaker. I could never get up in the pulpit and preach the gospel. I can't do this. I can't do that." When God calls us to do something, the first thing we always do is we try to come up with excuses of why we can't do it. God says, "Listen, I've got that covered." Moses comes up with, "But I can't speak very well." We'll get to that one later. But God says, "Listen, if you will use what you have, I can bring glory." "What's that in your hand, Moses?" "Well, it's just an ordinary staff. I use it to beat sheep. I've had it for 40 years. I just use it. It's what I do when I go around in the desert. I just use this staff, and I've had it for 40 years. Been using it for that long." God says, "Well, I want you to use what's in your hand. And I can take that ordinary thing that you have and do extraordinary things with it." Look at how God's used ordinary things all the way through the Bible to do incredible things. Shamgar is just an ordinary fellow, Judges chapter 3 and verse 21, who picks up an ordinary ox goad and he kills 600 Philistines. Samson. Oh, Samson, you know how he comes up against the Philistines. What does he do? He gets an M16 and he blows them all away. Man, I mean, he picks up a jawbone of a donkey, kills 1,000 Philistines. David, you remember the story of David, how he faces a giant? He gets this giant, he gets a rocket launcher, he puts it on his arm, and he blows that sucker up. Is that how he did it? No, he picks up a few rocks and a sling. He picks up 5 pebbles. Now, some people say, well, he didn't have much faith. Why didn't he just pick up one? If you really knew the background there, you'd understand why he had 5. Do you know that Samson had 5 relatives? And David, smart guy as he was prepared to take on all of them. So, he didn't need but one for Goliath. Goliath comes back. What does he do? Pops him right between the eyes with a rock. Down he goes. Incredible. Who would have thought? And he has 4 more in his pocket if any of his brothers come out. Just bring it on. That's the way he was. Incredible. What's that in your hand, Moses? What's just a stick? Well, pick it up, Moses. You and me are going to go to town and we're going to get the job done. Now, what's that in your hands? I don't have anything. I'm just an ordinary fellow who lives in an ordinary house with an ordinary job. I'm just about as mediocre as it gets. Well, you better start getting used to doing extraordinary things, because that's what God does. He can do incredible kinds of things, because when an ordinary God works through ordinary people with ordinary tasks, with ordinary abilities and resources, my God does extraordinary kinds of things. Incredible kinds of things. And we ought to be ashamed when we come. By the way, if you'll notice, every night this week, we're going to find somebody. I think my favorite one is the widow woman. She is the most unlikely hero of all the heroes we're going to talk about this week. That's the woman on the far right over there. She had nothing. A little flour, a little oil. She's out there with her son. Meets Elijah. Elijah says, "What are you doing?" She said, "Well, I'm picking up some sticks here. I'm fixing to go home. I'm fixing to use the last bit of flour and oil I got. We're going to bake a cake. Me and my son are going to eat it. And we're going to die." That's about as low as you can get right there. And Elijah said, God's got bigger plans. Esther, probably my favorite verse in all the Bible, where Mordecai comes to Esther and says, "Esther, I got a job for you. I need you to go to the king, because horrible Haman has convinced the king to kill all the Jews, and you're our only hope. You're the queen. Go to him." She said, "Man, I have not even been before the king, and the law was if you go before the king asks you to go, you could lose your head." She says, I don't want to do that." And Mordecai, I love his statement. He says, "Who knows whether you've come into the kingdom for such a time as this?" And then he says, if you don't do it, God will get somebody else. But who knows whether you've come into the kingdom for such a time as this? Or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We're going to talk about them. Man, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they said bow down or die, they said, then we're going to die. And they said, my God is able. But even if he doesn't save us, I will not bow down. That's faith. That's incredible faith. But that's what God does. He takes ordinary young guys, does things. He takes an old woman that's served her life and gone to the end of her life and is fixing to die and says, I'm not done yet. By the way, there's some of you old people here, God ain't done with you yet either. So don't ever get to that point. What's that in your hands? We ought to be ashamed of ourselves when we start saying we're just ordinary people and we just got ordinary abilities and there's just ordinary things and there's really nothing special about us. We should be ashamed. We have an incredible God who lives in and works through ordinary people when they use their ordinary things that He's placed in their hands. Some of you today, this week, you have an extraordinary opportunity to get people here for the first time, but you've already been sold a bill of goods that, well, you know what, I really can't make that much difference. I don't know that many people. I'm not going to invite them to come. I'm not going to try to get them here. I'm just going to, I'm just doing good to show up myself. And there's some of you won't even show up yourselves. Who are you serving? Some mamby-pamby God or the great Jehovah? You can do great things. Why? He says, the first thing he tells us, he says, listen, understand that I am with you. That should get you going. Understand, though, you need to take that ordinary thing that you have and use it for the glory of God. We need to do that. Yeah, but Moses is still not convinced. Look at verses 10 through 17. Moses said to the Lord, "O Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave man his mouth?" I love that. Who gave man his mouth? Who makes him deaf or mute? Who gives him sight or makes him blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say. But Moses said, "Oh Lord, please send somebody else to do it." You'd think. But I'm going to tell you, Moses is just like us. Just get somebody else to do that. Then the Lord, anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron, the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and his heart will be glad when he sees you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth, as if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand so you can perform miracle signs with them." Wow. I tell you what, I don't know about y'all, but Moses was really pushing his luck here, wouldn't he? I mean, God has showed him all these things. He showed him the miracles. He showed him what he could do. He told him to lay down the staff. He told him to stick his hand in there. He told him to pour out the water. He told him all this. He's seen these great, incredible things. But God gets somebody else. I'm just not a very good speaker. And if you see there, he made God mad. You know, the Hulk, you says, you remember I should have brought my mask out. I've got a mask of the Hulk, but the Hulk. You remember when David Banner says, "You don't want to see me angry." You don't want to see God angry. I mean, he destroyed the world. He destroyed every human being on the earth. Moses made him mad. God said, "What about your brother?" Isn't that interesting, though? God he doesn't let him off the hook. He doesn't say, "Okay, I'll get somebody else." You're still my man. I'm going to use you, and I'm going to use you for the glory of God. But there's a third way ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things. They understand that God is with them. They use what they have in their hand. And the third thing is they band together. Moses probably couldn't have done the job, because he wasn't able to say the right kind of words and do the right kind of things. And Aaron couldn't do the job either, because God wasn't speaking to Aaron. God was speaking through Moses. So God would talk to Moses. Moses would talk to Aaron. Aaron would talk to Pharaoh in those flowery words that would get across to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh would respond. And it was only when they were working together that they were able to get the job done. And I immediately think of when Jesus sent them out 2 by 2 in the Bible. And Ecclesiastes 4, 9, and 10, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him up. But pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. God has put us together in this church for a reason. He put us here to help each other. In Hebrews 10:24, and let us consider how we may spur one another on to love and good works. That is why you are here this morning. I think of Deborah and Barak in Judges chapter 4. Barak says, "I won't go unless you go." I think of this passage of Moses and Aaron going together. Think of all the great things that can be done for God if we just understood the principle of ordinary people plus ordinary things plus extraordinary God can do extraordinary things. I pray for the day when you and I can learn these 3 lessons. That you and I can be co-workers with an incredible God to do incredible things. When we use the ordinary things that God has placed in our hands, incredible things will happen. When ordinary people band together in the strength of God, incredible things will happen. Now the question comes to me for this: are incredible things being done at the Line Area Church of Christ? Are incredible things being done? Are mediocre things happening? Or are incredible things happening? How about our goals? Mediocre or incredible? The number of baptisms, mediocre or incredible? We need to get behind God. There's some people here today who are living such mediocre lives. You'll never get out of that trap until you learn the power of God in your life. If you're outside of Christ, you have to die to yourself in the waters of baptism, raise up to walk in newness of life, acknowledge the power of God in your life. Until you learn that Jesus should be in your life, then you're always going to be mediocre. You will never accomplish any great thing for God without His power. He says, without me you can do nothing. I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me. Philippians 4 and verse 13. Well, we need to do that. There's some here who are in Christ, but you're still living mediocre lives. Maybe it's because you've never fully acknowledged the presence of God with you. You've tried to do it yourself. You're not using the resources that are right in your hands. You're not working together with others in the body of Christ. Let me tell you something. God can take this church and do incredible things if we'll just believe Him. Incredible faith. That's what we're going to be talking about all week. Some of you don't have enough faith to get you here tonight. You need to come back. You need to be here. I guarantee you, when you see what God can do with all of us working together, you'll be amazed. Or you could just go on with your mediocre life, and you'll never know the glory of victory. We sing that song, Victory in Jesus. You can have it this morning. And if it can help you, I want to encourage you as we stand and we offer the invitation.